Okay. It is Tuesday, December 7th, 2021. We're here for the regular board meeting for the county commissioners. All three commissioners are present. We have the clerk of the board, and we also have our county administrator. So at this time, I will call the meeting to order, and would you please rise and join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started tonight, I would ask you to please join me in a moment of silence for the 2,400 plus people that died on December 7th, 1941. So if you could join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank all the veterans that have served this great country of America. So with that, we will go down to the first order of business, which is the approval of the payroll rosters.
Move for approval of fund expenditures in the total amount of $870,122.61 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Is that it for the?
That is it, yes.
Okay, and then I'll look for the approval of the consent agenda. I believe there are 5 items on the consent agenda.
Move for approval of the consent agenda, 5 items as presented.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for the approval of the 5 items on the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. With that, we'll move down to the commissioner and administrator updates. Keith, would you like to start? Got to hit your mic there.
Thank you. Yes, last week spent about a day and a half with folks from the BCES board in a strategic planning session. There'll be a lot of discussion coming up in the future about the organizational structure, what that should look like going forward. I think you're well aware that we, a couple years ago, consolidated dispatch centers into a single regional unit. So this is somewhat a continuation of that. At the same time, BCES is managing those resources. Our BIPIN organization, which is the regional public information network for law enforcement, jail management systems, record management systems, is undergoing a significant upgrade, and we've kind of come to the point where we realize that we're going to have to do some consolidating of effort between BCES and BIPIN. And so I've been very much engaged in that discussion. There will be more detailed information that will be brought before the board at a later time, but that discussion is ongoing. I'm spending quite a bit of time on evaluating what's going on with the ARPA Rescue Plan Act funding. In the future direction, the federal government is still making some decisions that will impact how and when we allocate some of those resources in Franklin County. We're getting input from other counties around the state of Washington to see how those funds are best utilized. The federal government did enact some infrastructure funding that will impact some of the decisions that we make going forward, but it's requiring a bit of time. And of course, end of year, working on getting the budget implemented and ready for next year, the budget that was adopted by this board last week. So that's what's occupying the majority of my time.
Thank you. Commissioner Peck.
Well, this week's meetings and discussions revolved around the County Road Administration Board, which is a state agency of about 8 or 10 people. We distribute all the gasoline taxes collected statewide to the various counties. Also looking at the transportation infrastructure package for the coming year. Anticipation of discussion during the legislature, obviously, on that. Benton Franklin Council of Governments and Rural Revolving Loan Fund, reviewing loan applications for upcoming meeting next week. We'll consider approving those. Discussions with meetings with TRIDEC and the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation on the continuing effort for shoreline reconveyance of shoreline along the McNary Pool from the Army Corps of Engineers to local municipal jurisdictions. Discussions with Washington State Association of Counties and the Legislative Steering Committee, which is a body made up of representatives from all 39 counties, was invited this week to serve in 2022 as the chairman for the Legislative Steering Committee for Eastern Washington. There's also a Western Washington chair. And our function with that committee is to meet with the legislators in Olympia and represent the views and wishes of the 39 counties. Other miscellaneous contacts and phone calls this week, but those are the highlights.
Commissioner Mullen?
So took part in the local decision makers meeting last week, also with Ben Franklin Transit Planning and Marketing meeting, Southeast Washington Aging Long-Term Care Governing Board meeting, the Tri-City Metro Task Force, also took classes on the active shooter preparedness training, and also met with Lori Hales, Angie Matarola, Sheriff Raymond, and Monty Huber on preparing for a sales tax for the chemical dependency and mental health treatment program. And this is something that we've been meeting with over the past few months. Just trying to get a feel for what the residents of Franklin County want to do with the mental health. And I think the consensus is that, at least from everyone I've spoken to, is they're in agreement with it, and that Franklin County wants to have an equal say in how our tax dollars are being spent, and also equal representation on the mental health board if and when approved. Thank you.
So my week consisted of workforce development. Ben Franklin Transit operation and maintenance was canceled. Columbia River PAC was just today. A lot of information on the Columbia River, the Canada-American Treaty, everything that's going on in the Columbia River. A lot of talk about the tribes and the adjudication, which could mean that we would move from senior water right holder to a junior water right holder, which is what's transpired down in Oregon, the Klamath Basin, and the water has been pulled from those farmers. So this is a very urgent thing for us here in the Columbia Basin to have a senior water right position. And then just also this afternoon at 3 o'clock, I met with the Veterans Board, and we had a co-meeting with Benton County Veterans Board, where Paul Lamb is the chairman of the Benton County, Scott Smiley is the chairman of the Franklin County. Very good meeting. They are asking for a joint commissioner meeting again here at the Hapo Center, where we can discuss and hopefully put through a VSO, which is a Veteran Service Officer. What we have here is we have a lot of veterans that are being turned away from the funds that are available from the federal government, the state government, and yes, locally our government, the county government, which we have $570,000 in the fund right now that is being collected every year, and we need our veterans to receive this aid. And so a VSO is very much needed, and I am looking forward to that January meeting to where we can put this in place and get our veterans the help they deserve. So with that, we will move down to the public comment. Now, if you have anything other than the mental health and chemical dependency, we will have a public hearing on that. So if you have anything else that you'd like to address the board on, please come forward at this time for the public comment, if there's anybody with anything other than that. Is there anybody on the phone, Keith?
No.
Okay, seeing no public comment, we'll move into establishing a sales tax for chemical dependency or mental health treatment programs. And at this time, I will open the public hearing on ordinance 11-2021, establishing a sales tax for chemical dependency, and it should say, and mental health treatment programs. So at this time, we have a presentation. Keith, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief and invite Monty to the table. He has prepared the presentation and been very involved with discussions in the community about this. And just for those who may be unaware, I'll just kind of briefly highlight what we're talking about. The Tri-Cities region is really the only major metropolitan area in the state of Washington that does not have its own standalone substance abuse and mental health recovery center. And so what typically happens when somebody's going through a crisis, they end up involved with one of our law enforcement officers in perhaps jail or something that's not very consistent with what the treatment that they need. And so Monty's going to kind of go through some of the discussions that have been had in our community, why this is important to us, and the end result will be a decision by this Board of Commissioners to enact a 0.1% mental health sales tax, excuse me, that would help us fund the operations of such a facility in our area. So, Monty, please.
Thank you, sir. My name is Monty Huber. I'm a commander with Franklin County Sheriff's Office. First, I'd like to thank Commissioner Didier for recognizing our fallen heroes on December 7th. I appreciate that. We're here tonight to speak to you in reference to the crisis that's happening not only in Franklin County, but in Tri-Cities. And we're talking about mental health and drug issues that we're seeing. And it's pretty evident when you drive down the road and you see these folks in the middle of parks, on street corners. The problem is we don't have a solution. And this solution is going to require several layers of a solution to address this issue. So I've originally prepared a PowerPoint, which is not working on this, so please bear with me as we scroll through these slides here. So the sales and use tax for chemical dependency mental health treatment services and the therapeutic courts, this RCW was passed in 2005, so this is not new. And the problem has grown substantially since 2005, and there are plenty of folks in here that have been touched personally or know someone that's been touched personally by this issue. And now's the time to address it. So what we're talking about implementing is 0.1%, which is essentially 1 penny for every $10 spent as a sales tax, not to be confused with a property tax. And these numbers are not exact. These are approximate numbers that we could raise by implementing this tax. And between the two counties, we're talking about probably $9 to $10 million in sales tax that could be raised to support this solution. So under the RCW, this money can be collected and must be used solely for the purpose of chemical dependency or modification to an existing facility or mental health treatment programs. It can't be used for other sources. So
Hi, I'm Angie Manarola, and I am not a good public speaker, so please bear with me. But this is a very personal issue for me, and it's important to our whole community, as everyone knows. The evidence of need, if you watch the media, it's pretty obvious, or if you speak with any first responders, there's obvious need out there. But we also took some statistics from the Cadillac Community Health Needs Assessment. They do this assessment every 3 years. And in 2016, their strategic issue was to improve the mental and behavioral health system. And this was a new thing. Before, their needs were pretty much focused on the physical needs of people, but they were seeing trends where the mental and behavioral health was going further and further into crisis. Their 2019 Community Health Needs Assessment survey found that the dominant themes shared by the community members in listening sessions included the need for affordable and accessible comprehensive health care, including mental health services. So the survey asked stakeholders, which are community members, to list their top 5 health needs in the community. And according to the report, the number 1 issue that was substantially above the others was mental health and substance use disorder. Behind those were homelessness and lack of safe, affordable housing and access to behavioral health care. Further down in the report, there was a particular concern about not having a detox center in the Tri-City area and no drug inpatient treatment center. I would encourage everyone to get on. All you have to do is Google Cadillac Community Health Needs Assessment and read the reports. They're very, very interesting. There are a lot of statistics comparing Benton and Franklin County to Washington State about youth suicide attempts and completions, overdoses attempts and completions, poverty rates, truancy rates, and sadly, our 2 counties are not doing well even in comparison to Washington State.
So to offer more evidence of the crisis if needed, I'm going to call upon my friends from Pasco Police Department, and we're going to talk about some of the calls for service that we're seeing as first responders.
Good evening, Commissioners. First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to hear us this evening. I know Chief Roski and Deputy Chief Cook would have loved to be here, but due to prior commitments, they were not able to be here this evening to speak to you on this very pressing and current matter at hand. So with the Pasco Police Department, we see a number of mental health type calls on a daily basis. And just as an example of that, over the last 3 months, we have seen approximately 214 calls for service that were mental health related. Now, if you were to search our records management system and look for just those mental health calls, you would only find 11 calls that were during those 3-month period that were labeled as mental health. But due to the new legislation and everything that we're having to work under nowadays, the majority of those calls for service were altered response or trespassing calls. And if you start going into each and every one of those calls for service, you would find that they were either mental health or some kind of a substance use issue. And to speak to some of those issues, I've got my Sergeant Vaught and Sergeant Brad Gregory, 2 of our patrol sergeants.
So some of the issues that we're dealing with is, you go back in my career, when I first started here, mental health calls were occasionally. Now it's like a regular basis. We're sitting on somebody in the hospital right now in a stolen vehicle, so it's going to be titled something differently. But his problem is mental health caused by narcotics. One particular incident that happened in front of Lord's, which was right in front of everybody, we had a gentleman that was suffering from a mental health issue. However, he showed up at Lord's with a knife in each hand, not threatening anybody, but he's got a knife, and we spent quite a while talking him down, de-escalating him so we could get him in and get him into treatment. So at the end of the day, one of my officers managed to talk him down, put the knives down. We got him in, we got him treatment. Our goal was to get him into a mental health treatment facility. However, what we ended up having to do is we left him at the hospital holding a potential misdemeanor charge because he didn't need to be out in public in his mental state. So eventually, mental health had no place to put him. So we had no place to put him, so we decided, well, he's going to need to go to jail. Not the place he needs to be, it's the place he had to be because he was a danger to the public. Ends up in Franklin County Jail, but not for a simple misdemeanor disorderly conduct. He ends up assaulting the officers that are taking him into custody. So we failed that guy by not having a place for him to go. And I wish that was just one story, but this is a daily basis that we deal with. If you drive through downtown, you'll see plenty of people walking the streets that we can't help because we have no place to put them. And that's just, like I said, a patrol officer. I've been doing this for 30 years, and that's what we see daily. And it gets worse and worse every day.
Good evening. I just want to touch briefly on the Blake decision and how that's affected our ability to get these people into treatment. So much of the mental health issues that we're dealing with are drug related, and the Blake decision effectively took away our ability to take people to jail for possession of narcotics. And what they would get when they go to jail is drug court, mental health treatment, drug treatment, those types of things, where they had at least a chance to get treatment, to recover, and come back to society. But they're missing that with the Blake decision because we have no authority to get them into jail and no alternative, no beds, no treatment, anything to get them without taking them to jail. So we're stuck. And so these people are out there and there's no interim. They just keep offending over and over. And so you get these, the captain talked briefly about the limited number of mental health calls, but we're dealing also with disturbance calls and trespass calls and shoplift calls that are all related to these types of things, and felonies as well. We had a guy get stabbed just recently because of something similar that this is causing. Somebody that would have been in jail previously and would have been able to get treatment, they're not getting it. We just have lost that ability. So that road to recovery doesn't exist anymore with the Blake decision. So we are left now with a whole lot of people out there in need, and we've got nothing for them. And it's a frustrating situation. So we would appreciate any support we can get. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. If I could call on Coroner Curtis. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for taking some time to address this. As the officers had mentioned, some of those that they don't have a place to take them, so they take them to jail. And what I see so many times is they get to jail, they don't have the opportunity to get treatment, they get out of jail after maybe a month, 6 months, whatever the time is, and they go right back to the dose that they were taking prior to on drugs. And I would say almost 98% of those I end up handling because their body can't take the dose that they had built up, the tolerance that they had built up prior to. Now they're back to it. So if they have a place, they're starting to have withdrawals. And if they don't get the right treatment, some of those end up taking their own lives because they just don't know how to deal without it. So in the last 3 years, or 4 years, just to give you some numbers here, we've had 54 overdoses in Franklin County. Now that only counts those that I see. That doesn't count if they get transferred to Cadillac or Trios or out of the counties or Spokane even, and they die there. Those are counted as a death in that county, so $1 million. Well, Commander here mentioned that that's what the sales tax would raise between the counties, but if you ask a family member who's lost someone, I think they would put that value higher than a $10 million value. It's the 47. The average age in 2020 was 53. In the last 2 years, we've had 30 males overdose and 6 females overdose. Types of drugs that they're using, most of it is fentanyl. There's been a great increase in those. Morphine or methamphetamine is another one. Not too many prescription drugs. Those have really come down. I know the medical field is really monitoring that heavily. In agreement with the officers of Pasco, too, as you can see around town, those that are standing in need of it. So I would ask for your consideration in that decision you have to make. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As far as Franklin County, we are seeing similar scenarios in the rural setting, so it's not limited to the city of Pasco. These folks are being dropped off in the middle of the county in the rural areas, essentially left to fend for themselves. You've heard a few examples. I've prepared a couple more scenarios to offer to you as evidence of a need. If I could get Captain Paramore to step up.
Thank you for your time. I got to be careful with this one because this is an active investigation and we don't want to get into specifics about this case. Although I know that those who live in our community that were watching the news on this day, they have a rough idea on some of the facts that have been released from the affidavit of probable cause. We dodged a bullet on this one, folks. A bus full of elementary school kids. We're very fortunate that this was not a lot worse. Was there another one, Monty, that you were going to touch on?
Yes.
That one's yours, right? So this one also had, we were very fortunate about geography on this specific case. For those who may not have seen this in the news, Franklin County Sheriff's Department has dealt with this individual more routinely than we are in the city. Unfortunately, this night, which was Halloween night, it jumped into the city, the King City truck stop area to be specific. An individual is alleged to have stolen a potato truck and went on quite a little bit of a rampage, driving up and down 395, hitting vehicles, swerving and hitting or moving towards police vehicles. Eventually, thanks with partnership with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, we were able to deploy spike strips, get this truck stopped, became fully engulfed. He ran and fled, putting our officers and deputies in danger, running through traffic on 395. The scary part about this is he kept doing a loop in the King City area. If he would have continued to go down Oregon Avenue, he's very close to neighborhoods where thousands of kids are trick-or-treating with a potato truck, high on methamphetamine. Something that we're dealing with more and more. To get back to the Blake decision, as you know, this was initially a Washington State Supreme Court decision that impacted us. It was the "these aren't my pants" defense. And they overturned that law in saying that it was not constitutional because it was missing the knowingly piece of it. They didn't knowingly possess narcotics. And so our legislature had the opportunity to pick that up and fix that. And what they came up with was a misdemeanor after law enforcement provides 3 referrals. I can tell you that every person that we come in contact with that we seize some sort of narcotic from, we give them a referral form. Speaking with our mental health professionals, they're not following up and seeking help with the referrals that we're providing to them. I can tell you that there isn't anywhere to take these people. I talked with our local mental health professionals. We have 38 crisis and inpatient beds in the Tri-Cities. And again, I hate to say that we're pushing 300,000 people in our community. We have 38 beds. We are in dire need of a brick and mortar facility where we can take these individuals where they can get the proper care. Talking with our mental health professionals, I'm going to give you one stat. So we have an MHP program that we received from a grant, funding from the True Blood grant, where we have mental health professionals embedded with our patrol department, and they ride in the cars with us. We're having difficulties keeping that staffed, but since its inception in October of 2019, in the city of Pasco, they have made 1,657 contacts with individuals who are experiencing a mental health crisis. And that's just with the MHP on board. That's not the total numbers that we're dealing with. That's just what we can contact with our mental health professionals. Our community has no detox facility. There is nowhere for them to go. So we're being hamstrung by legislation and the ability to have people put in facilities. That's what we're dealing with. And the police aren't the answer, the only answer. We're part of the solution. We can only do what we're allowed to do. And that's where we're struggling right now.
Thank you, sir.
Good to go?
So I had made reference to a scenario where an individual was dropped off in rural Franklin County. It's this particular incident that I'm referring to. The deputies received a call of a woman trespassing in a barn. They contacted the individual, and she was on an emotional roller coaster, yelling and screaming. At some point started removing her clothing. It wasn't responding to any of the folks on scene. And we brought a Pasco officer with a mental health professional to the scene, but since it was rural Franklin County, it takes some time to get there. So in the meantime, deputies and ambulance folks are trying to de-escalate the situation and talk to this lady, and she wasn't responding. And then finally, one of the deputies had built a rapport with her, and she would only respond to him. Very scary situation for all involved, because we showed up there to help her, and we didn't want to be put in a situation where we could get harmed or she could get harmed. All in the meantime, figuring out where we're going to take her. We had no place to take her. I'd like to call on Lori to speak a little bit. She was one of the EMTs on scene. No way.
So my name is Lori Hales. I've been an EMT in North Franklin County for over 25 years. I'm going to read from this because I'm bound by HIPAA, and I don't want to say too much in respect for the law. I responded to this sad and unsettling incident as a volunteer EMT. I have limited experience with irrational patients. We were on the scene for over 35 minutes. Thankfully, a very patient and persistent Franklin County deputy was eventually successful in de-escalating the patient enough to agree to a transport to the hospital. under the condition that he escorted her in the ambulance with me, which I was happy to also have him there. I was glad the deputies did not arrest them for trespassing, instead encouraged them to go to the hospital to seek appropriate treatment. Hopefully our local services were able to accommodate and meet their needs. However, I know our resources are very limited. These patients obviously need mental health care and not jail time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. So the final scenario that I share with you this evening is at a local restaurant in Pasco, a mid-30s-year-old female came into the restaurant, went into the restroom, and then went back out to the entrance where they have the gumball machines and the things for the kids. And she was obviously under the influence of some sort of narcotics. And watching her, we realized that she is quite far in a pregnancy. So you can't help but wonder what's going to happen with no treatment for her, and what's going to happen to that child in these current situations. She wasn't committing any crime, and we didn't have a place to take her. So the resources are limited. I have a video on here that I'd like to show you. If I can get to it. Mark, can you help me get to the video? I apologize. So this video was shared with us as a concern as to what do we do to help these kinds of these folks in these situations. You can't put them in jail, and she hasn't done anything illegal. So I believe the answer is a service or a facility that offers lots of services and not just a drug service or not just a mental health service, but offers many services at one location.
So to reiterate about the resources currently available, basically we have first responders or family, friends who have someone that needs care because of a mental crisis or drug-induced psychosis or anything. They can go to inpatient psychiatric care, which is Life Point north of Cadillac. In Washington State, in 2018, there was a study and they found that there are 9.1 inpatient psychiatric beds per 100,000 people. That ranks Washington State 46 out of 50 states. Well, in the Benton and Franklin County, we are at about 300,000 people right now. And I called over to Life Point in September, and they said they were full and they had 10 beds. So ideally, they have 38 beds, but they, at that time at least, they could only provide 10 inpatient full beds. So that's what we have for our 2 counties. And please remember, that is only for people 18 years and older. There are no inpatient juvenile facilities here. The closest one is in Yakima. We have no detox center. The closest one is in Walla Walla. And I can tell you personally, if you're going through something like this, the last thing you want to do is have to travel to get the care you need or to help a family member. The crisis center, I talked to them today. Their day shift has recently been reduced from 5 crisis counselors down to 3 because of staffing. They still have a drug assessment person, but they no longer have a chemical dependency counseling there or group counseling. So as the needs are getting higher, it seems like our services are getting less. Another option for people is jail, but they have had to commit a crime. And people with chronic mental illness and or severe substance use disorders can remain in jail for months to await competency evaluations. And while they're in there, they decompensate. That's not the place where they need to be for the best treatment. And as taxpayers, we're paying for them to be in the jail, so we just as well pay for them to be in the appropriate treatment facilities. The other option is the ER, which is great for medical emergencies, but it's not a good place for a treatment of mental illness or drugs. And sadly, what usually happens is people get released back to their family or friends if they still have people that will accept them, or they go onto the streets. And if they don't end up dying from overdoses or suicides or anything else, they will either commit a crime or become a danger to themselves and or the community, and then the cycle just starts again.
So in conclusion, first I'd like to thank you for your time. And please consider everything that's been said this evening. We have an opportunity to do something positive for Franklin County and the Tri-Cities this evening, and I hope you seize the moment and do exactly that. Sheriff Raymond.
Commissioners, I'm going to read a statement instead of trying to shoot here and shoot there to you. I've been a member of this community since 1978, right here in Pasco, right here in Franklin County. I've lived here, I've worked here, I've raised my family here. I'm now concerned about my grandkids and their quality of life in Pasco and Franklin County. This is a diverse community of people whom support each other, both in the good times and the bad times. Illness. These 3 issues are intricately weaved together, which equates to a complex problem that we must solve. This is a problem that the state isn't going to help us with. They're not coming. It's time for us to help ourselves. In the 1980s, the Tri-Cities drug, alcohol, and mental health problems were pushed into the darkness, into our back alleys and flop houses and bars, all in a 10 square block area of what I refer to as downtown Pasco. Ironically, in those 10 square blocks, the people that were causing the problems or having the issues and occupied those areas, their zip code wasn't 99301. This is no longer the case. I have just finished my 40th year in law enforcement. All of this law enforcement experience being served in Pasco and Franklin County. In the span of that time, I have watched in real time, countless people die before my eyes of drug overdoses. It was common occurrence that it is a common occurrence that first responders get to witness routinely. In my mind's eye, I can see individuals laying in the gutter, dying while overdosing on heroin. The effect of that heroin overdose causing a person to gasp for air while gagging and purging. Purge is a red tingy substance of foam that comes from your mouth and your nose when you're overdosing just before you die. I've watched individuals high on cocaine or meth, talking gibberish, half naked and sweating on a cold winter evening. The individual standing in front of me, talking gibberish, and then in the next frame, in my mind's eye, I watch him fall and bounce off the pavement like a sack of potatoes, dead. I've learned over the years that what's happening is their heart valve is exploding. Their heart valves are exploding and they're dead before they hit the ground. What I've learned over the years of watching these stimulant type deaths occur is just that. It's death. And somehow we have to change that trajectory. Today, right now, a deputy, a police officer could take each one of you and put them in their patrol cars, and within a 15-minute time period could put you in face-to-face with a homeless person that's going to have the trifecta. Not only are they going to be homeless, they're going to have drug addiction issues. They're going to have mental illness issues. And it's everywhere in the Bi-County region now. It's not just in that 10 square blocks of Pasco that everybody used to refer to. It's completely in the Bi-County region, and all of our neighborhoods are at risk, and all of our safety is at risk. And we need to do something. Commissioners, ask yourself, what do you want your legacy to be years from now? How do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as the obstructionist? Or do you want your legacy to reflect that of a commissioner whom was involved in solving these complex issues? Issues which are unfolding in front of our eyes and in our neighborhoods today. Commissioners, I encourage you to implement the sales tax. I encourage you to start collecting the sales tax April 1st of 2022. I encourage you to be a part of developing a bi-county comprehensive drug and mental health recovery center. And I encourage you to fight for your constituents by placing them equally in numbers at the implementation and planning tables for this project. Thank you.
Is that it, Monty?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So with that, I will ask the commissioners for comment.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'll make an exception and take this mask off because I don't sound like I'm coming through very well with it on today. I want to start by thanking all the people who went to the trouble to assemble information and case studies and bring forward a broad array of support for this particular issue. Sheriff Raymond pointed out that he's been in law enforcement in this community for 40 years. suddenly my 13 years as a commissioner doesn't seem so significant, but I think we both have a fair handle on what's happening in our community. I wanted to touch quickly on about 4 things. The first is, about 10 years ago, I'd have to check the record, 9, 10, 11 years, something like that, I started asking my fellow commissioners to enact this 1/10 for mental health and substance use disorder. For a variety of reasons, my former seatmates were not inclined to approve any kind of a tax increase, not even this one. So I want to say up front that my read is that my fellow commissioners today probably have a different mind and a different heart on the subject than some of the previous boards. I'm certainly optimistic in that regard, and I want to thank them in advance for whatever support they can bring. I have looked at this issue from a lot of different perspectives. You know, when law enforcement encounters somebody in the street that is behaving in a fashion that we might normally consider as out of the mainstream, and we send that law enforcement professional out there to engage this person, we already ask our law enforcement to be about 25 different specialists in one, and adding mental health professionals on top of it is just not realistic, never was. And I've always had this concern that law enforcement has to weigh whether or not this person is a danger to themselves, whether or not they're a danger to society. And at the same time, they've got to keep in mind that they have really no means to take somebody into custody if they haven't done anything other than maybe act what we might think is a little different, but they haven't broken any laws. And sometimes they have. But we've sort of given them this very narrow band to operate in, where it's essentially you either take them to an ER or you take them to jail, where they typically take their clothing, give them a jumpsuit, take their meds from them, and isolate them. I have a family member who's a longtime mental health professional who has suggested that perhaps the 3 worst things you can do to somebody in crisis is take them to a jail, take their identity and their clothing, take their meds, and isolate them. I'm frankly a little surprised that counties across the country haven't been sued repeatedly for that kind of treatment. And then there's also the issue of you got somebody on the street who's acting a little differently, and we do incarcerate them when there's a marginal question as to whether or not they've actually broken the law, and aren't we at that point trampling on their First Amendment, or excuse me, their constitutional rights, especially the Fourth. So there's just that whole cluster of issues that, like I say, more than a decade ago were a concern. So we got a group together. I don't know how many of you know this, but we actually got a group together. We found a piece of property at Spalding Business Park off the end of Columbia Center Boulevard down by the river. We actually identified the plot of ground. We drew plans for the building. We figured out how we could pay for it between the 2 counties, and we were good to go, and then we couldn't get the tax approved. And there were a lot of people, not just me, that were involved and made that happen. But it was pretty devastating. We couldn't get the funds for it. The rest of it was mapped out. It became apparent that there wasn't going to be any appetite for increasing the tax unless there was some sort of an offset so that we could say that there's no net increase in taxes. And you've heard talk about Ben Franklin Transit. That's where that idea came from. It was to ask the transit voters if they would be willing to voluntarily reduce the transit tax from 6/10 to 5/10 if the 2 counties would promise in writing to invoke the 1/10, so that we'd have no net increase in taxes. It wasn't perfect, it was a classic political compromise, but that's how hard we tried to get this 1/10 approved back then. Didn't work, still hasn't worked today. There's been a couple of references to brick and mortar facilities, and as I've just described, we had one designed for Spalding Business Park, and it was brick and mortar, and we were going to spend a lot of our money on the structure. And I've grown concerned over the years that maybe we should be looking more about dedicating as much money as possible to services and as little as possible to structures. And while I didn't have a direct hand in it, I know that Benton County and others have been working on the old KGH hospital and converting that. And that seems like a nice middle ground to get a facility up and running without having to build it from scratch and have the costs that go with it that would take away from services. But I'd also encourage us not to forget that there are lots of professionals in the private sector, and more would come if we had the funds to retain their services. And that's a quick way to ramp up and ramp down the amount of services as needed without having to build more brick and mortar. Again, the goal being spend as much as you can on treatment and as little as possible on bricks, mortar, and utilities. The discussion this evening has been great, and it has bounced into about 3 different corners with the issue of co-occurring disorders. Some people have used language that sort of suggested that drug abuse and mental health are synonymous or they go hand in hand, and I just want to highlight what I think we all know, but it should be on the record. Some people suffer from mental illness. Some people suffer from drug abuse or addictions, and some people have those co-occurring disorders. And as Sheriff Raymond so aptly pointed out, some people have the trifecta of both of those co-occurring disorders, and they're homeless on top of it. But I'm sensitive to not stigmatizing people who are mentally ill but who do not have a substance use abuse disorder. Those are 2 very different people and 2 very different things, and we should always remember that. So as not to stigmatize people who are simply mentally ill as also being drug abusers. There was a reference to starting collections April 1st. My understanding of the statute is that the earliest we could begin collecting is July 1st. I hope I'm wrong, and if somebody has evidence that they can show me later that we can do it sooner, I would certainly support doing that. I think I have probably already taken more than my fair share of time. I want to close by saying that my passion for this subject comes from seeing people on the street. It comes from having a family member who, as I mentioned, is in this field as a professional. And it also comes from a lifetime growing up with 2 parents who met back in the early 50s working at the Harlem Valley State Mental Institution in southern New York, one of the notorious mental institutions in this country. And I grew up where there were discussions about people with mental illness who were treated as criminals and who were roundly abused in these facilities back in the 50s. And so I'm well sensitized to the subject. I couldn't be more happy that we're finally, after a decade, at a table where it looks like we're going to get this thing passed. Thank you for all of you who brought pressure to help make it happen. Thanks.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for showing up today and showing your support. And thank you to the citizens of Franklin County for pushing forward with this issue that needs to be addressed. I've been a lifelong resident of Franklin County. I've seen the changes, and I see what's happening here. I see what's happening across the state, and we need to get control of this before it escalates any worse. I mean, just last week I had someone pounding on my car in downtown Pasco in broad daylight who was obviously not in a right state of mind. But this issue isn't going to go away, and we are paying for it regardless if we support the tax or not. It is affecting everyone in Franklin County, and I have total support for approving the 1/10 of 1% tax. It's much needed. And I also support the fact that I think we should have an equal say and we should have equal seats on the board when it is developed. When you live in Franklin County and you drive across the river and spend your money over there at the mall, restaurant, shopping, you're still paying that 1/10 of 1%, no matter if you spend it in Franklin County or in Benton County. And that's why I think that this should be collaborated together and we should have equal representation. And thank you. Thank you for showing up. Appreciate it.
I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This is a very important issue for Franklin County. I just want to make a statement right off the bat that the tax alone will not solve the problem. And I'm in favor of this tax. Now, Benton County has already passed this tax, and I too want an equal say. Benton County is talking about building a new structure, brick and mortar, 10 beds. We've already heard 10 beds is not even close to being enough. I'm in favor of that, the old Kennewick General Hospital, not only for mental illness, drug addiction, but also for Mere Ministries. when you can centralize everything in one location, the doctors, the psychiatrists, the mental health professionals, everybody doesn't have to drive all over here in Franklin County, Benton County to treat everyone. It would be an incredible campus for these problems. Now, we heard 214 calls. How many of those are repeat offenders? Are those 214 separate situations? You're seeing the magnitude of beds we need. And that's why we need the Kennewick General Hospital. I hate to admit it, but I got pulled over by a state trooper here last year going over the overpass there at King City. Didn't have my seatbelt on. Breaking the law again. And in the process of talking to him, I said, hey, I just seen 3 people under the overpass there. 3 transients. I said, where are these people coming from? And he said, they're busing them in from Seattle. I warn you, we create a great facility. It's not only going to be filled up with the people of our neighborhood, but the state. They're bringing them over in groves. And we need to protect against that. But we also got to have a way to fix the problem. And the way we fix the problem is we have to allow the police, Pasco, county sheriffs, every one of these law enforcement officers to do their job. We need people in the legislature over in Olympia that will take away this, I can't even remember what it is now, the law that they just passed that's undermined our sheriffs. This has to be removed. We have to be able to take care of the crime that is happening in our neighborhood, the Blake decision. And in closing, I talked to 2 mothers that have lost their children to overdoses. And when you talk to a mother that has lost their child, they wished they would have been arrested. They wish they would have got treatment. We need this facility. But we need to take care of our neighborhood, not the state. So with that, we'll turn it over. Go ahead, Keith.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Go
may,
ahead.
I know I took a fair amount of time earlier, but there's an additional piece of information I meant to share that I think is going to be of some use to the entire audience. This 1/10 tax is what is known as a councilmanic authority, and it comes from the root word councilman. And it was established from talking with legislators as a way for the state to avoid directly taking on any degree of responsibility for mental health treatment and facilities in communities like ours. And the premise was that if they gave the council, in this case a board of commissioners, the authority to tax itself, then it gave them a political shield so that if we asked for money, they could look at Franklin County today and say, well, you know, you've got authority to tax your own people, and apparently it's not important enough to you to do it, so we're not bringing any money. And when Sheriff Raymond said, you know, the state is not coming, that's partly why. We are in the minority statewide now. I think more counties have approved this than have not. But I would say that once this is approved, and I believe it will be, it does open the door for us to petition the state for additional funds. Until this passes, we've given them an easy way to say no, and that is, well, you haven't passed your own tax, why should we give you funds? Just another reason why it's so important to pass this tonight. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that I referenced my parents working at Harlem Valley State Hospital. One of the things they pointed out in the stories was how they had patients, inmates, call them what you will, not in rooms, but lined up in hallways, row upon row. So the failure to fund this kind of treatment in our society is not a new problem, but I'm glad we're making progress. Thanks.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Just, Commissioner Peck clarified a couple of things. One of the things I need to point out, the resolution language that is, or the ordinance language that's before you tonight, shows an effective date of July 1st, 2022. So if you desire to move that up to April, we'll need to amend that language in the in the ordinance, if that's the preference of the board. Secondly, and before we get to public comment, I know there's a lot of people here that probably have input that's important to the board to hear, but I see Matt Rasmussen, and Matt, I'm going to call on you to come forward briefly, if you would, to kind of include your comments as part of the official record here. Matt and I have spoken about this. Matt is the Deputy County Administrator in Benton County. Because of our relationship with Benton County and our need that's been reiterated tonight that we'll need to be working closely with them. Matt, if you wouldn't mind just kind of informing the board of what Benton County has done, where you are on this.
So, yeah, sorry. As the commissioners already know, Benton County did pass this tax on November 7th. Our implementation date is July 1, 2022, although I do believe the Department of Revenue requires a 75-day notice from when you pass it to when they can actually collect it. So if you did want to collect it in April, I do believe that is possible. We chose July for our own reasons and timing and how we wanted to make that work. The county has been working on a acquisition of the KGH building to build and construct a recovery center. It actually is slated to be a 50-bed facility to start with, and there is significant room for other services and expansion of that program if it's desired by the community. We have a lot of discussions to do with Franklin County on how these community services are going to work. I think everyone here knows all these services cross the river. If there's something's offered on one side, people are going to go there to get it. It only makes sense to have a successful program that we all work together to make that happen. We offer similar services on both sides, or at least one side where people can go and vice versa. It really is important. I think I also happen to be a Franklin County resident, so I did want to add to that I strongly support this tax. I'm not a big new tax guy, but we're paying for this right now. We're paying it for it in our jails. We're paying for it in our emergency room costs. We're paying for it with the time that our law enforcement and EMS and fire responders have to handle these. And so putting appropriate programs in place, I think, is critical to moving forward in this community. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions the commissioners have, but thank you for the time.
So with that,
Actually, I do believe, since how we have Monty here, it was one of the questions that did come up in our discussion was how soon we could implement the tax. And we might as well get it cleared right now. Monty, you checked into that, is that correct?
I have, and as long as it's implemented before or by January 14th, it can be effective April 1st.
Thank you.
and Monty, with that, question I have, seeing that the police officers at this point in time with this Blake decision have a hard time apprehending these people. The mental health professionals that are out there today, can they apprehend and take them to these facilities then? How is this all going to work to get them to Sheriff Raymond? Yes, please come forward, because this is my concern. How are we going to get them to the mental health facility from the scene?
The cops are going to take them. What currently happens today, okay, is the cops will respond to these type of calls, and they have very limited options. So what smart cops do is they'll stand back and they'll wait for the person to commit a crime, because when they commit the crime, they can physically arrest them and they can take them to the Franklin County Jail. And they also know that at the Franklin County Jail, the taxpayers are paying for medical doctors, for nurses, for psychiatric doctors and psychiatric counselors, so that they can at least get the minimal services to try to stabilize them in order for them to enter the jail facility. Once they're in the jail facility, we have some programs in place, and probably Commander Saltemeyer would be more versed to what takes place when they come in there. But today, that's the only service. If you're drunk, we'll figure out how to get you arrested so we can dry you out in the jail setting, and we're going to kick you back out on the street so you can have the same problem occur over and over and over again. If you have mental illness, you'll eventually find your way to the Franklin County Jail, where there's at least some minimal services at the tune of about $1.5 million a year, I believe. Keith could probably give you those numbers a little better.
So Sheriff, what crime do they commit? Because right now, drug paraphernalia, drugs aren't even a crime, correct?
I believe one of the sergeants talked about that it's not uncommon to arrest them for trespassing or disorderly conduct.
Okay.
So misdemeanor type of crimes, when it's either, you know, and again, these are my words, so don't take them as gospel, but you dream up some sort of a misdemeanor crime that you're going to arrest them for to try to get them to those at least minimum services for stabilization. We are still arresting people for narcotics crimes. There's some workarounds, but what happens primarily to these people is they hit what we refer to as the Jersey felony barrier. So in other words, they get charged with felony crimes, such as the spud truck incident. And then by that, when that occurs, there's really no helping those people other than to put them on, you know, Suboxone, for example, which is a synthetic heroin in the jail setting to try to keep them from, you know, causing harm to themselves and those type of things. And then they go through the court system and they get sent off to prison or they spend a year in jail or those type of things. And understand that our jails are full of narcotics, full of homemade alcohol recipes. Those type of things occur in our jail settings all the time, and more so in our prison systems. So their habits or their vices just continue to grow in the incarcerated setting. Where if you can take a person in the beginning of their drug addiction or their mental illness and unplug them from the jail setting and plug them into a treatment type of setting, the success rate's going to be much better. In our jail, the commander and the captain started a program where we're taking 6 inmates at a time and put them into a classroom, dormitory type of setting where we get them their GEDs, we get them counseling for their substance abuse disorders and so on and so on. And when they leave out of the jail, we try to leave them a little better off with an education, with job opportunities, with housing, you know, with counseling, all those type of things. And we were doing a very good job at that in the beginning until COVID hit. And I think out of this first group of 6 that we've only had 1 return, if I'm correct. And so that we have those type of services, and they're not going to go away in the jail setting. We'll continue those. You'll continue to pay that $1.5 million, probably more, to be quite honest with you. So those services will be there, but it's not going to fix the officer's ability to pick people up and plug them into services that they need to be plugged into, opposed to jail. If that answers it for you.
Yes, and thank you. Absolutely. You got another question?
Sheriff Raymond, how does a law enforcement officer deal with someone who's not committed a crime? For example, they're threatening suicide. Does the law enforcement officer have the authority to detain them, to get them to a facility?
In certain circumstances, yes. It used to be that you would take that type of person and you would take them to Carondelet, where the officer would say, I took this person in custody for him to be evaluated. You would drop them off. And then the doctors and that staff would do the thing, and then they would talk with the courts whether a person was going to be detained or be held in other services and those type of issues. Nowadays, the officers pick people up, take them to the hospital. The hospital doctors, the ER doctors say, yeah, I can do something for them, or call mental health, and then mental health will respond out most cases 6 to 8 hours later to come out to go, oh, well, he's fine now, and kick him back out on the street. Kick the person back out on the street. So those are really the options right now. Back in my day when I was a patrol officer, if I encountered a veteran in the Burlington Northern Railroad yard that was intoxicated and threatened to jump in front of trains, I'd pick him up and I'd take him down to the social detox center and I'd drop him off. and then they would take care of it, and they'd try to restore him and then put him back into the community. Or if I was dealing with somebody with mental health issues, I would take them to Crondale, I would drop them off, and they would handle that, and it was out of the police officer's hands. Those days haven't been around for a long time, gentlemen. Actually, to be quite honest with you, we started to go downhill in that arena when mental illness was decriminalized, which was a good thing, it should be, but we put ourselves in park and we didn't develop any other services for the mentally ill or those people with drug-induced type of issues and so on. We just sit back and kick the can down the road. And here we are in 2022 with a big problem. Okay.
Sheriff Raymond, as long as you're taking questions.
Okay.
So we've had a little history over the last decade or so between the two counties that sometimes got perceived as friction when really what it was a difference of opinion on the issue of legislative authority. We have two counties that each have a board of commissioners, and each is responsible for lawful and appropriate use of resources. The issue came in our bi-county programs, and I'll use human services as an example, where Benton County, being roughly twice our size, was consuming 2/3 of the resources for the program, and they were contributing 2/3 of the funds, and likewise Franklin County was consuming about 1/3 and paying about 1/3. So it worked fine in that respect, but the challenge came in then and still exists, is that when you have two elected bodies and you're making decisions on spending and on policy, and it's a pool of money, you run into this difficulty where no one in one county voted for the commissioners in the other and vice versa. And so you have one county expending and committing and making policies that the other county didn't get to vote on. And we resolved that by establishing a client-customer relationship where Benton County today operates the Human Services Program, Franklin County operates as a subscriber. From my view, it gives us some flexibility. If we don't like the services and the costs, we can always go somewhere else, and we're not sitting there holding and owning a building. So there's some pros to it. So I wanted to give that background of where we've been and the friction we've had, because it was 50-50 vote on how things got done, but one county felt it should maybe have 2/3 of the vote because it had 2/3 of the money. So not taking a position on that, but what I'm getting to is, do you have a view, an opinion, a thought, a perspective on how you'd like to see these services organized, structured? Who would perhaps, broadly speaking, oversee the program, keeping in mind this historical conflict between legislative authorities?
Well, my view, first of all, is this. This is a public health issue. It doesn't matter which commissioner is in charge or not in charge. This is a public health issue, and I want it addressed as equally as you all as commissioners possibly can. I'm pretty in tune with my community, and I know my community. They want to have equal seats at the planning and implementation tables. They don't like the 10-3 split that currently exists. I like Commissioner Mullen. I bet you I spend more money over in Benton County shopping, buying things, purchasing cars, etc., than I probably do in Franklin County any given day. So if we're going to talk about ratios and who pays by ratios, well, I want my pennies sent back over to Franklin County then when I'm over buying something there, or vice versa. Because this isn't an issue where you can split who's financially responsible. This is a public health issue. We have a Benton and Franklin County public health system. And I think you're going to find that the taxpayers really don't care who's paying the penny. They just want a seat at the table, and they want to be heard. I want to be heard. Franklin County's grown up. They're not the stepchild anymore. It's growing, it's vibrant, it has a healthy economic future ahead of it, and it's going to continue to grow. And we probably won't be sitting here, but 10 years from now, I got a side bet with you that Pasco is going, and Franklin County going to be the biggest of the two counties in population-wise and city-wise.
Apparently the secret's out, just look at North Pasco.
It is, the secret is out.
So
Look at the jobs that are coming to Franklin County in
Right.
the next few years, and take each one of those people occupying those jobs and add 4 members to it. We're going to explode, and we're not going to be the small county much longer. And so I would just ask that you act like a big county and take responsibility for what we need to do, and let's get to it, and let's make it happen.
So the drug court that we have set up between the counties, because the funds for that are earmarked by each county and are not to be commingled, we actually purchase a certain number of seats or positions in that program. We could certainly do a similar thing by Franklin County paying for and having a certain number of beds in a facility. How does that strike you?
I think Franklin County needs its own veterans court, and basically is what you're talking about.
Well, I was talking drug court, but I agree with
Drug
you on
court,
veterans court. We need that too.
Both of those.
Yeah, and there's actually provisions to use this 1/10 to create a chemical dependency and mental health court as well.
That's correct. It's clearly written in the RCW of that, yes.
Thank you, Sheriff.
I would just like to say I agree with Sheriff Raymond, and, you know, I think we have new blood on the county commissioners here in Franklin County and the same in Benton County, and I do believe we can work together, and this is an issue that affects all of us, and we're all paying in equally. It's not based on anything else but sales tax, and so all these funds, we should be an equal partner. Thank you.
With that, I encourage everybody to shop online because our taxes are up dramatically here in Franklin County because of everybody shopping online. Thank you very much. So with that, we'll open it up for public comment at this time. If anybody would like to say, just come forward to the mic, introduce yourself. So, and there's a 3-minute limit, please.
Hello, I'm Dr. Loanne Ayers. I've been a resident of Franklin County since 2000, a proud mom who's raised 3 kids here and now have 2 grandbabies who are growing up here in Franklin County. As a farm girl, I have a real commitment to providing access to service for the very rural areas of our county, and I'm very much in support of this. I am also, putting on another hat, the president of our local United Way. And we track data, talk to agencies, to faith-based organizations, to public safety and the health department about the challenges that are facing our kids and our families. And let me tell you, what was happening before COVID has been magnified. And particularly in mental and behavioral health among children and middle school kids are significantly worse because of family stress and chaos and violence in the home. So I'm very much in support of a positive affirmation of this new tax. Thank you.
Now, I have a question, and maybe, I don't know. I have 2 cousins who were addicted to drugs, and they both ended up in prison. They felt it saved their life because they were forced to be there. They ended up drying up and found God, of all things, and they both are living their life. They've completely changed their stripes. So some of the most amazing people I know are people that were once addicted. I'm part of a Facebook group page called Incarceration to Inspiration, and the stories on there just bring tears of joy to your eye. So I know that there is a path, but I just don't know if we do bring people. My husband had a cousin who was highly addicted to alcohol, and my husband's aunt spent over $500,000 trying to get him cleaned up. He'd been, dried up several times, hospitals. It got to the point where she had to pay up front before a hospital would take him. He finally died at 40 years old because his organs gave out and left 4 children without a father. So I don't know if this Blake law or Blake rule keeps it so that if they are just going to be cycling in and out, you know, like I said, over $500,000 for just that one cousin. And I don't know. I also have a son who has mental illness. He's has OCD, and he's never taken a drug in his life other than what was prescribed. And so I do understand the difficulties with insurance. When Obamacare came, our insurance doubled, and he didn't get any more coverage. It was still the same deductible, and then the limit to visits, it never ends up paying $1 for the doctor. So there's just so many things. I feel like the state is the biggest problem. It's really a simple problem, but it's the state, the federal government that doesn't control our border, and all their ridiculous laws that are actually making it complicated. And I do hope that we gather dollars from the state. If we pass this tax, then we get more funding because they owe it to us. They are part of the problem. And if they're dumping people out in the country and bringing people here, I agree with Commissioner Didier. What starts out as a small problem will be a huge problem, and our taxes will have to be raised to address it. So just something to keep in mind, that whatever board we create really keeps an eye on it, that they just don't, here's the money, and then walk away and hope the problem's solved. It's got to be watched. So.
Hi, my name is Ronnie Batchelor, and I work with Lords on their outreach program. I live in Kennewick, but I've serviced Franklin County since 2010 when I moved here. Outreach to homelessness, Sergeant Gregory over there and I became really good pals when I first started. There were a lot of folks that I reached out to with co-occurring mental health and addiction. And I would help them get through the systems of care that they needed to get to. And that's exactly what I do now as a peer specialist. I am someone with lived experience of having a mental illness diagnosis. And I've also tried to die by suicide, and I have a son that died by suicide. This is very important to me, that people get the services that they need, and they get people like me to be able to get the pillars of support in place and guide them through the process. Because when they get guided through things, they succeed. And when they find that they can be successful, they do better. I'm gonna call this client Jerry Garcia, like the Grateful Dead. And when I first started with mobile outreach, this was a gentleman that was referred to me by my mental health professional out on the street with an officer. I did meet this man in 2010. He would not get into my car. He would not talk to me, but he would take the money out of my hand, and I knew that he was not an alcoholic. He was not using drugs, but he was in his symptoms of mental illness. And when he came to us, and I was referred to him, I was so elated, because now I can finally have an agency behind me to help him get to where he needed to go. We were able to get his Social Security back in place. He was out on the street homeless for 10 years in these symptoms. Highly, highly psychotic. He was able to get his food stamps. He was able to get his disability $192 a month until we can get everything else pulled back together. We were able to get him a housing voucher, and I was able to get him into a 55-plus place. The officers from Kennewick came out and gave him a housewarming. He wanted a vacuum cleaner. They got him a vacuum cleaner and a few other little things that he needed for his home. He's an immaculate housekeeper. He is still housed 3 years later, 3.5 years now. these are the outcomes that can happen. And I would like this to continue to happen in our communities, because not only do I service over in Benton County, I service here in Franklin County, because we do work with the Franklin County police officers. And by the way, my friend over there, he can let you know a couple of our stories that we had together. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Gerber. I'm the president of the Benton Franklin Recovery Coalition. And I'm also the parent of a young man who lost his life to addiction in the Tri-Cities in 2014. And I can tell you that all of the time that we struggled, from the time he was 14 till the time he was 36 and his death, all those 22 years that we struggled, we never got services in the Tri-Cities. We always had to go to California, Seattle, and Sundown in Yakima a couple of times. In total, we used treatment services 10 times, and all of that money left this area. Okay, so if we had had treatment here, the small fortune that we spent, those dollars would have been spent in this area. And that wasn't possible. So I'm here to speak in favor of the tax. And I know that so many other people have spoken eloquently, I barely need to say anything. But I want to tell you that not only are the jails not able to handle these people, neither are the hospitals. When a person goes to the hospital with an overdose and they wake up, they're told to leave. Okay, you're awake, you're good. So there is really no treatment there either. So I'd like to say that to the audience, whether or not you know someone in addiction, whether or not you have sympathy for addiction, whether or not you think addiction is a disease or not, it's in our self-interest to pass this tax and have services here and treat these people. There will be cost savings, as others have said, in the jails and the court system, also in the ERs. There'll also be shorter waiting lines for the rest of us in the ERs. There will be savings in insurance costs. There won't be the littering and loitering and disruption to businesses. And we will keep those treatment dollars, as I said, in this area. So one more thing. Since food and prescription drugs and rent are not taxed by sales tax, if you pass this tax, you will not be putting an extra burden on the lowest level of the economic ladder, because those things are not taxed by sales tax anyway. And so, furthermore, as someone else said, if you pass the tax, the state's going to be much more willing to give money to this cause. They've told us that in so many words. They want to see that local government has a stake. If you put a stake in this, then they'll be more willing to open their pocketbooks. And so I urge you to vote yes and be part of the solution. Thank you for all your time.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. My name is Dr. Christina Chacon. I have a private practice in psychiatry here in Tri-Cities. I'm also a professor at Washington State University, and I'm the immediate past president of the American Psychiatric Nurses Association Washington chapter. I wanted to offer a couple of perspectives. First perspective being that of a provider. Here in the Tri-Cities, for my entire career as a provider, it's been known as a black hole. We lack resources. When patients become acutely mentally ill and they're in need of inpatient treatment, we don't have anywhere to send them. We do have, obviously, Lourdes Counseling Center, but the resources are limited. When we have somebody who is in need of substance treatment, they have to go out of town. That's been a very difficult obstacle for me as a provider. Now, as a professor, I do teach students to do what I do. And I've had the privilege of working for 2 different universities that graduate future psychiatric providers. And one local here at Washington State University, Tri-Cities. We also have a difficulty with educating our students because there are limited resources. So what I would say as far as my perspective on this opportunity, we have an opportunity not only to treat our deserving patients in the community, but we also have a wonderful opportunity to grow our workforce. Our students would have an opportunity to intern at these facilities, and our patients would obviously get better care, the care that they deserve. Lastly, I wanted to comment on the situation of patients that are being placed in the hospital in the emergency department. Many don't actually stay there. My husband is coordinator of the case management department at Cadillac Hospital, and he says these patients, they get on what's called a single bed certification, and they just wait for a bed. And sometimes, they'll have one per day, sometimes 6, and they just wait, sometimes weeks at a time. So this is a wonderful opportunity. I see it as a great opportunity to grow our workforce and start getting out of the black hole that we've been in. Thank you.
My name is Jamie Carson. I'm the Executive Director at Somerset Counseling Center in Richland. I've been a practitioner of substance use disorder treatment for 17 years, including Franklin and Benton County. I can tell you as an outpatient provider, we are drowning. There's a lot of treatment happening in the Tri-Cities. The problem is we're out of our depths for those particular populations that need immediate access to residential care, secure withdrawal management, and the services that aren't provided here. We're fighting for beds that are limited statewide. There are some beds that we can't even access. There's wonderful programs in King County, for example, like the CORE program. That's a great co-occurring program that is for King County only. So there's 16 beds right off the bat that we can't even go for. And I can tell you as a provider, the longer somebody's waiting for a bed, the more symptomatic they become. And even though we're doing the best we can at an outpatient level to navigate insurance authorization, waiting for the residential providers to review the file, get them on a wait list, make sure they have transportation, make sure they have all the necessary things to take with them. The person is escalating in symptoms. They're out in the community, a potential risk to the community. Sometimes they stay in touch with us, sometimes they don't because their symptoms are escalating. By the time a bed date comes around, it's kind of Russian roulette whether we can actually get them there or not. Once they actually get to the bed, it's, again, a hit or miss whether they're stable or not to make it through the intake or if they even get there. So we're doing our best. Like I said, there's a lot of services happening, but we're definitely having a deficit for that high risk, high need, immediate access to 24-hour care that we haven't had since Casita del Rio. Anybody remember that? And that's, as a provider, it's just devastating. Knowing that we've had patients that could potentially be successful and re-enter our community had they had access. And we also know that a collaborative care approach is so successful for patients and helps them with a less risk of relapse when they can stay in contact with their medical provider, their MAP provider, their vocational, educational support, their housing, their family, and having their family be able to participate in the family program. You can't do that when you're across the state in a bed. So having a local recovery center makes all that possible for them to have that seamless transition back to outpatient and keep all their other services in play. And it just helps them become more successful when they get back into the community. So it's seriously a win-win for the community as well. So I'm so supportive of this tax, and I think it's just something to really consider when you look at the big picture. And I thank you for your time.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jason Bliss. I am the Executive Director of the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. I've been here in the Tri-City area in Pasco for about the last 12 years, 10 of which those years I've been working with those with substance use disorders and mental health disorders. To be honest, I thought I was going to have to come up here and really beg and plead with you guys to want to step up and do the right thing and implement this new sales tax. I know that new taxes are not popular at all, and I know it's probably very hard for all of you to sit up here and want to even consider that. but all of the words that all of you have spoke tonight here have all been very powerful. In me working with the individuals that I've worked with in the Tri-Cities and the Pasco areas, our resources here are very scarce. Our local people here in our local community need help, and they need that help here in our local area. When individuals that are suffering from drugs and alcohol, in the treatment world, we like to say that they have a brief moment of clarity. In that brief moment of clarity, they reach out for help. Sometimes they will go in, they will have assessments done, and it's then and there that they need treatment. It's then and there when our local members of law enforcement have interactions with these individuals on the streets, they need to have somewhere that they can take those individuals. They don't need to be burdened and tied up for 5 to 8 hours at a time sitting in our local emergency rooms. As some of the officers stated time and time again, they will be sitting there for 5 and 8 hours only to have the doctors come in or the mental health professionals come in and say, yeah, we're going to release them back to the streets. They don't necessarily want to release them back out into the streets, but their hands are kind of tied. They have nothing else, no other place to send them because we have no other treatment options here in the Tri-Cities. I'm very in favor of this tax, and again, I'm going to keep my comments brief, but I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the approach that you have taken and understanding the severity of the issue that we have here in the Tri-Cities. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shauna Tietzort, and I wear many hats here in the community, all throughout the Tri-Cities. I'm an outreach pastor. I also am a newly appointed board member at the Tri-City Union Gospel Mission. I work, volunteer a lot with Mere Ministries and several other organizations in the community, both in Benton and Franklin counties. I am super excited about just your guys' response in going for this. I have had situations where I've had clients or people that have come to me and wanted help, and I'm actively reaching out to all these different resources and left with nothing for them. I have taken people to try to find places for them and ended up having to take them and pay for them to stay at Motel 6 and hope that on Monday there's a resource open available for them to get help. Or I've also had a couple situations, one very recently, as of a couple weeks ago, where somebody that kind of was in my care went to and had a psychotic episode, went to the hospital via police car, and after being there for a little bit, they said, yeah, you know, you're okay. And she said she walked out and felt like she just wanted to walk right into the traffic and end her life. And that was just a couple weeks ago. I've also had another client that, this was probably about a year ago, she came to me and said that she was having, you know, suicidal thoughts. What do? I said, okay, we're going to call crisis response. We're going to get you connected to Lourdes. And she went, she was able to get some treatment and left briefly, and then ended up back in their doorstep, suicidal, and there was no beds for them, or for her. And literally turned around and left to go back out on the street. And just for whatever, the grace of God, I guess, that she did not take her life at that moment. But that should have never happened. And I love that, what Brad Peck said about the Kennewick General Hospital not spending the dollars on the construction of something, but spending the money on getting more people in there to help, paying those people to come in and you know, do all of those different pieces, because we need that more than we need the building. We've got that facility. It's amazing. And I love the idea of Benton and Franklin County working together and doing this. And I You know, I see a lot of the mental, or the homeless people. Obviously, I deal a lot with homeless people too. I feel like a lot of those people, if they had the mental health and the drug addiction help, there would be less of that as well. It just kind of goes hand in hand. So I am in big support of this, and I just thank all of the law enforcement and everybody in the community that is a part in even just fumbling around trying to figure out what we can do when we really don't have a definite, this is what we can do. So I appreciate every one of you guys in considering this. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is James Jimenez, and I am in support of this facility. But the reason I'm up here is John Logue wasn't able to attend tonight, and he gave me a letter to read for everyone here. So it reads, "My name is John. I'm an alcoholic. I came to this conclusion 18 years ago. I have since recovered from what many doctors dated back to at least 1934 believed to be a disease. I can speak first-hand knowledge of this physical, mental, spiritual horrors that go along with alcoholism. Watching my physical and mental health deteriorating over time led me to a rock bottom that I wish to never encounter again. Did I engage in unlawful behavior? Yes. Was I a criminal? My behavior in sobriety indicates that I was not. Rather, I was a sick individual who merely needed help. With alcoholism being mainly a sickness of the mind and spirit, I can easily transfer my beliefs about alcoholism to mental illness and addiction. Currently, our two counties of Franklin and Benton have been treating sick people as criminals with no options but to incarcerate them. This places an undue financial burden on law enforcement, jail facilities, and our judicial system. Additionally, the cost to social safety nets and as many people suffering from these illnesses are unable to maintain steady, are forced to rely on government to help survive. The suffering is not limited to alcohol, addict, or mentally ill. Families are torn apart. Children suffer a hell of a lot that is not on their own making. Furthermore, statistics show that domestic violence can be attributed in large part to substance abuse. These are all things I have first-hand experience with. The cost of a mental health chemical dependence treatment facility will likely be offset by the savings in the areas above, and a likely return on the financial investment is conceivable in a way of returning some of the patients to the workforce and becoming productive members of society. Likewise, it will stop the suffering of the innocent people in the lives of suffering alcoholic, addict, and mentally ill, perhaps even preventing those from going down the same path. I urge our Board of Commissioners to vote in favor of relieving our county of the financial and familiar burdens that are associated with not having a treatment facility in our community, and to vote for the future of those afflicted and affected by the alcohol, drugs, and mental illness. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jason Lawrence. I'm a first responder, but in Benton County. I won't say the agency I'm with because I'm here as a citizen in reference to this. Introduce yourself.
I'm Taylor Brummett. I'm a mental health professional with the Lord's Mobile Outreach Team.
So we do work together on these particular issues discussed. First of all, I want to say mental health is a social issue for the area as a whole. It is important that both counties work together with the available tax funds that is proposed to solve the community mental health crisis. The citizens who in need of this community who need services are often in Franklin County one day and Benton County the next. Law enforcement agencies in Benton County and Franklin County are often contacting the same subjects day by day. I support this tax for the many reasons discussed by law enforcement and discussed by all the county commissions. There are many conflicts for law enforcement that have recently arrived because of the legislative bills. HB 1310, use of force. Before, RCW 7105 allowed law enforcement to use the minimal amount of necessary force to bring a person of imminent threat or others to serious harm to get some assistance. HB 1310 has created a law enforcement dilemma. HB 1310 states an officer must have probable cause for a crime to use force on a subject. RCW 7105 conflicts with that, so it creates a dilemma for law enforcement, and those issues need to be resolved to assist law enforcement, to help the community, to bring these people to get help. Often, these people now have a choice where law enforcement cannot do anything because of that dilemma between 1310 and RCW 7105, where law enforcement leaves to de-escalate the situation as they're supposed to. RCW 1031-110 already exists. It says an officer has discretion to seek mental health treatment instead of jail. It's an alternative to an arrest. Currently, what we're doing is there's a transitions program through Lords where it was an option for something like a trespass and a subject has an obvious mental health issue that they need assistance with. But the dilemma for law enforcement is the time involved with bringing them to transitions. The law enforcement officer has to bring them to an ER first to get medically cleared. Law enforcement simply does not have the time or resources to bring that subject to Cadillac ER or wherever the ER would be, and then bring them to transitions. That creates a dilemma. Having a central facility, like Commissioner Didier discussed, KGH is a good start to this. And the funding from both counties, from Benton and Franklin County, is detrimental. And therefore, I support this tax initiative. Thank you.
Like I said, my name is Taylor Brummett. I'm a mental health professional with Lord's Crisis Services. I'm assigned to the mobile outreach team, so I work with the police officers. There are several of us from Crisis, and we just wanted to say that we definitely support this. We work very hard to find placement for individuals. Unfortunately, we are very low on places where we can send them. We try our best, but sometimes we're left with no options. I did also want to bring up one of my first days working with Pasco, I was with Sergeant Vaught. And there was this woman who wanted help. She was finally at that point where she was at rock bottom and she just wanted a way to get help. And so we're looking for all these resources and there is nothing locally for substance use. We're like, okay, well, you can look at Spokane, you can look in Yakima, you can look here, you can look there. We called the substance abuse mental health place and we were like, what do you have? And there was nothing locally. So because she was voluntary, it fell to her family or herself to ensure a way to get to a place. And when you're at rock bottom, it takes a lot to get you to go and to be able to get to Yakima or to wherever. And that's if you have support even to help you do that. So I think that having another resource locally would be of immense benefit, both for mental health, substance use, dual, and for us to be able to provide better care at crisis, be able to provide resources that our clients are actually going to be able to use and not have to go far and wide in order to get. Thank you.
I'm Mary Rosen, and I, like Sheriff Raymond, moved here in 1978 to Franklin County, and I do remember the 70s, and the addiction back then has a different face than it has now. It's just a totally different game. In the early 90s, we adopted 2 drug-addicted babies, and I did not know the journey that I was going to be on with them. I thought all you need to do is give these babies love and a home and structure and that they will be fine. That is not the case. And they're both in long-term recovery today. But again, like Michelle, my children had to go out of our community to get treatment. And lots of money spent in other areas, not local in our community. And the piece that is missing for me is that I, as the parent, did not get the education that I needed. And so they were off out of, across the state. And I'm hoping that this facility will make, they always talk about addiction being a family disease, and it truly is a family disease. And parents also need that education. They need to know how to deal with addiction themselves, because they end up, I call it, they become addicted to thinking they're going to save their children. So they need an education on how to deal with these addicts so that everybody in the family can get healthy and they can stay as a healthy family. So I just wanted to bring that family piece to this. Thank you.
My name's Trevor Crosby, and you don't know me, and I want to just thank God to be an American and that you all have shown up here tonight. And praise God that you care enough about your community that you'd show up here. Some of these guys get paid tonight. They're here. It's their job. But some of you are members of the community showing up. I want to thank all you out there fighting for freedom just hard. Man, it's been a tough year, whatever the heck it's been since all this crazy COVID stuff. But, man, I'm sure glad to live in Franklin County with some really good old American boys around here. I'm telling you what, holy smokes, these farmers and country boys, man, I love you guys so much. I'm here with you. I'm not moving nowhere, and I thank you for not leaving Washington and going, oh man, we got a bad governor. Let's go somewhere else, man. We can't put up with this governor. Let's move to Florida. Let's just leave the farm. Let's sell it to China. They don't need our beef. They got enough beef out here. They have enough potatoes. Fight for America, brothers and sisters. Thank you so much for putting on the badge and the uniform out there. Go ahead and defund the police. That sounds like a great idea. Those retards. It's just the sheriff, the county sheriff is America's last hope, brothers and sisters. In God we trust, and we back our sheriffs, and we stand together, and we succeed together, or we fail together. All for one, and one for all. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Okay. So at this time, with no more public comment, I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion that we pass ordinance 11-2021.
I'll second.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, it took me a minute to get my mask off there. I'd like to amend the motion that's been presented.
Okay, there's been a motion presented, there's been a second. We will amend, go ahead with your amendment.
Okay, the amendment would be to change the necessary language in the resolution so as to enact the tax at the
April 1st.
earliest lawful date, no earlier than 1 April. I think that's required for the 75 days. So the amendment would be for the ordinance as presented with the tax to be enacted, we'll go ahead and use the 1 April to keep it simple, of 2022.
I'll second that.
There's been an amendment and a second to impose the tax at its earliest possible date. So with that, we've got a motion and an amendment. Is there a motion and a second on each of those? Is there discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all in...
Mr. Chairman, as the maker of the amendment, I'll just clarify that It is not the earliest lawful date, but 1 April of 2022, and would ask that we vote on the amendment first, of course.
So the amendment is to impose the tax on April 1st, 2022. And there's a second on that. All in favor of the amendment to impose the tax on April 1 of 2022, say aye.
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 Aye. Now to vote on the motion for the 1% sales tax. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of imposing the sales tax of 1.1% for chemical dependency and mental health treatment program, say aye.
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 Aye, Mr. Chairman. I think you meant to say .01, so I'm voting aye.
0.01, 1/10 of 1%. Okay. With that, we're down to administration office business. Keith.
I don't believe I have anything else tonight. I hope that was applause for me. That was applause because I don't have any more business to conduct tonight. These folks are anxious to get home.
Keith, do you have anything?
No,
on?
I'm
Oh,
good.
you don't have anything?
No, I'm good.
So we're open for public comment. Is there any other public comment?
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for having a night meeting. Would encourage you to continue to do this. I don't know how often is feasible, but I think it's helpful for the community to have meetings at night when most people are not at a regular day job. So I think you should consider making it a regular part of your Commissioners' meetings. I think 50% is something you should consider 50% of the time, but please take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Is there any other business for the good of the county? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Where are you going?